My big issue with the NFL Combine is that it seems to only benefit great athletes and not good football players. You got players like Shamar Turner, who didn't have a lot of production out of college, but since he looks good and shorts in a tank top, he's a projected first round pick. But if you're somebody that's like a Cam Scatterboo or Harold Fannin, being a good football player is a disservice at the combine if you're not a good athlete. Because the combine doesn't really have too much correlation to what transpires on the field, in my opinion. What the hell does running the 40-yard dash matter for non-skill position players? How many offensive linemen are running full speed 40 yards down the field? How many defensive linemen are running full speed 40 yards down the field that actually have a shot at making a play? How much can you evaluate from a quarterback at the combine throwing to receivers against air with no defensive backs? For the folks out there, the general managers, the scouts, the talent evaluators that are mad at Shedeur Sanders for not throwing at the Shrine Bowl, not throwing at the combine, why does it really freaking matter? We saw Zach Wilson and Mac Jones dominate throwing against air, and look how their careers turned out. Like, what are we looking for? Are we looking for 7-on-7 players? Are we looking for flag football players? Or are we looking for actual football players that are putting on the pads and the helmets? Because football isn't played in tank tops and shorts. It's played in pads. It's played on the field. It's not played on the track. It's not played running routes on air, which is why the NFL Combine is incredibly overrated. There have been numerous Hall of Fame players that didn't test out well at the combine and got overlooked because too many teams put too much emphasis on athleticism and the potential instead of looking at the production and asking themselves, is this a guy that can contribute and produce for my team now? If I'm drafting any position in the first round, I'm not drafting you to wait 3-4 years down the road for you to develop. I at least want you to come in and have somewhat of an impact your rookie season. The only time I draft for potential in the draft, if I have to spend the first round pick on somebody that I have to bank on the production for, is a quarterback. I'm willing to invest a first round pick in Anthony Richardson at quarterback because the quarterback position is the most impactful when it comes to determining wins and losses in the NFL. Therefore, if I have to wait 2-3 years for a guy to blossom into one of the best at his position, I'm willing to do so. I'm not willing to do that for an edge rusher or a corner or a wide receiver. These are positions that should be instant impact, especially when it comes to receiver and corner. There are not too many receivers and cornerbacks that end up having great careers after struggling their first 2 seasons. It doesn't happen that often. The majority of times, the best receivers from their respective draft classes hit the ground up and running from day one, like Jay Jettas, CeeDee Lamb, Ja'Marr Chase, defensive linemen like Jalen Carter. Prime example, I remember when, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, the Raiders used a top 10 pick on Tyree Wilson. And Tyree Wilson is like, he's not a bust, but he hasn't turned into the player that the Raiders were hoping for him to turn into yet. And there's a possibility that maybe he never turns into that player. You know, the Jaguars drafted Trayvon Walker first overall over Aiden Hutchinson, and Aiden Hutchinson has been the better player by a landslide. Drafting off potential because of great combine numbers, I think is a huge reason why a lot of general managers and head coaches lose their job. Yes, in the NFL, you want to have freak athletes. You know, when you got guys like Myles Garrett and defensive linemen that are like 300, 330 pounds, running 4'8", 4'7", you got to be a one percenter. You know, the NFL is home to some of the greatest athletes on earth. So you got to be somewhat of an athletic freak. And if you're not, you got to be really fundamentally and technically sound at your position. That's the only way you're going to survive if you're not a great athlete. But if you're a great athlete, but you're not the most technically sound, if you never develop that aspect of your game, you're never going to be successful at the next level. But if you are somebody that's not a great athlete, but you're good at the other things that it takes to be dominant at your position, you can still have a successful NFL career. I don't believe athleticism in the NFL is the end-all, be-all. I value your technique and your fundamentals more than I value your athletic traits. Yeah, athleticism does matter to a certain extent. You don't want to have a team of just average athletes out there. You want to have the best of the best. The goal is to find the 1%ers. But I'm not willing to take potential over somebody that I know is going to come in and be an impactful player for me year one. So the combine to me is more for great athletes and not for good football players. It hurt me to see Harold Fannin struggle at the combine and his draft stock get tainted because he was never a player that dominated off athleticism. He dominated because of how fundamentally sound he was, how good of a route runner he was, how much of a mismatch he is with his size, and when you put him out wide. You know, a guy like a Cam Scalaboo didn't want to run because maybe he knew he wasn't going to clock in the fastest 40 time, and it was only going to hurt his stock. But yet, we've seen Cam Scalaboo on the field. We know he's a dog. Just because you don't test well at the combine doesn't mean that you can't end up having a good career. We've seen guys like Richard Sherman end up not being that good when it came to testing at the combine and still became all-time greats. The majority of the best players that ever played in the NFL weren't always these freakish athletes, which is why the combine, to me, I watch it, but, you know, I'm kind of just watching it as just background noise. You know, I'm glancing at it every once in a while, but it's like, to me, I value what you've done on tape and your production more than I'm valuing how well you look running in shorts and tank tops.